Here, Dan.
Just on the ACT Senate.
You'll get another question, Phil, but I'm giving Dan a go.
David Pocock has said he'd like to see funding for a suburb-wide electrification pilot here in Canberra to sort of demonstrate that it can be done. Is that something you're willing to consider either through the process you're doing ahead of the budget or separately?
Again, I mean, I thank David, Senator Pocock, for his very strong engagement in support of the bill. He comes at these things in good faith, and I recognise that, as I do all the crossbench, including the Greens, with whom I've had the most detailed conversations. But David has raised that with me, and of course pilots and that sort of thing will be the sort of thing we would consider as we develop the strategy.
Yes, just on the coal compensation, you've already said that will take place in very, very rare circumstances, but obviously these are large amounts of money we're talking about. What sort of idea of compensation are we kind of looking at? We've seen estimations of tens of millions of dollars.
Well, what we're looking at in terms of direct compensation, particularly in relation to New South Wales, so when I say direct, I mean with New South Wales, that's frankly at the request of New South Wales to ensure certainty of coal supply in the unusual event that cost of reduction is over $125 a tonne, which we and the New South Wales government agree would be a rare event. Now, details obviously still being worked through, but we would envisage that being a rare event.
Minister, just based on your earlier answer, can we gather that your preference in delivering the electrification to households is concessional loans? Is that your priority at this stage? And which households do you expect will benefit? Will it only be low and middle incomes, or could it be all Australians?
Again, we're going to develop a strategy. I've talked about one example. I was trying to give Josh a full and frank answer about it, and used an example. I think the role of CFC will figure prominently in our considerations, but not exclusively. And I'm not announcing the strategy today. Claire.
Minister, given that the cap only lasts for 12 months and it's entirely possible that the war would go for longer, are you confident that if that code, however its final form is, will effectively carry on this attempt to keep prices low? And just to pick up on what Jacob said before, can we get an answer on how the market would deal with peak demand? Who would get what gas?
Well, the market will operate as it does today. Yeah, and then going forward there'll be a code which will govern people's interactions. And again, what we're after under that code is reasonable pricing. If people want to argue for the right to price unreasonably, I think that's a courageous argument to mount. Australian gas should be sold for reasonable and fair prices. While the cap is on, there'll still be a market, but we're capping the prices. And as I said, there's anti-avoidance provisions. There's the ADGSM, which is available to the government should the Minister of Resources feel the case is made. So there are multiple options available to the government.
Minister, just on the opposition, they have been complaining that they haven't received the legislation yet. Have you been consulting with them throughout this process? And why haven't they received?
I mean, give me a break. Seriously, the opposition. This was the Shadow Minister on Sunday, and I'm quoting. The legislation that I read yesterday was yet to go through Shadow Cabinet, yet to go through the party room, I think is a disaster. And it's a monster in the making because it will fail in the short term, yada, yada, etc., etc. So on Sunday they weren't voting for it because they'd seen the legislation and didn't like it. This morning they're not voting for it because they haven't seen the legislation. I mean, pick your lane, guys. Pick your argument and stick to it. On Sunday they'd seen the legislation, didn't like it. Today they haven't seen the legislation. I mean, Peter Dutton came out and said this was a catastrophe before the press release had been issued from the National Cabinet. These guys are not constructive and not of good faith. They clearly, Peter Dutton, without going to Shadow Cabinet, without going to his party room, had made a decision and said this was a catastrophe. OK, you've made yourself irrelevant to the process in that case. I mean, this is not an opposition seeking to engage constructively in a difficult situation. We've just been through a health pandemic where we as the opposition engaged constructively, supported where we could, made suggestions where we should, etc. We're now going through an energy pandemic and the leader of the opposition is playing cheap, old-fashioned denial and delay politics, blaming renewables, etc. They want to make themselves irrelevant, they've succeeded. Phil, I think everybody else, has everybody had a first question before I circle back to Phil? I'm nothing if not fair.
Thanks, well, just back on Jake's question of the code of conduct. It's 12 months away, it's complicated. The industry's warning of all sorts of unintended consequences. Why the rush to have it nailed down by February?
Well, I don't accept it's a rush, Phil. I mean, here we are in December. We'll consult until February. As I said, no doubt there'll be ongoing conversations. That's the way this government works. Our doors are open. We talk to people. We have formal consultations. where people can make submissions and we have ongoing conversations, and that's the way we work.
So you can tweak it beyond February if need be.
I don't think it's a major announcement to say the government will continue to talk to people who are interested in how the code's going to work. I reckon we've had a good go. We'll wrap it up there. Thanks, guys.